Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're officially putting on our hard hats as marine safety engineers to really evaluate the final definitive investigation from the Canadian Transportation Safety Board, the TSB, regarding the loss of the Titan Submersible. You know, when a multi-million-dollar vehicle is destroyed at the bottom of the sea, the whole world asks why. Well, by looking closely at the structural blueprints, the material science, and the corporate decision-making, we can uncover exactly what went wrong. The TSB's exhaustive report makes one thing abundantly clear right out of the gate. The catastrophic failure of the Titan, which imploded and tragically killed all 5 people on board instantly, wasn't some sudden, unforeseeable mystery. Actually, as we examine the evidence today, you'll see that this was a mathematically predictable outcome. It was the direct result of a long, heavily documented chain of poor engineering choices and deeply flawed experimental designs that ultimately led to the vessel being crushed under the weight of the Atlantic Ocean, literally like a soda can. Think of our agenda today as our engineering inspection checklist. We're going to methodically cover the predictable nature of the catastrophe, the geometry under pressure, the carbon fiber gamble, those fatal manufacturing defects, and finally, a complete failure in testing. All right, Section 1. The predictable catastrophe. A look at the chain of engineering flaws. As we begin our forensic review of these blueprints, the absolutely crucial takeaway here is that the company operating the Titan repeatedly, and I mean repeatedly, ignored standard engineering practices. From the very start, the Titan was doomed by an entire chain of experimental designs. Every single component, from the forward dome to the unpressurized pointed tail, and especially the pressurized hull, has to meet exacting standards. But the TSB concluded the operator lacked the fundamental rigor required to keep human beings alive at the bottom of the ocean. The risks were known, they were predictable, and ultimately, they were totally ignored. Moving on to Section 2, Geometry under Immense Pressure, or the Physics of Deep Sea Survival. To really grasp the sheer physics of a pressurized hull, I want you to imagine descending 3,800 meters below the surface to the wreck of the Titanic. Down there, the hull is subjected to 380 times normal atmospheric pressure. To put that physical load into perspective for a second, it is exactly like having an elephant standing on every single square inch of the vessel. That material standing between the humans inside and that crushing depth is literally the only thing keeping them alive. From a strict structural engineering standpoint, there is a clear, undeniable winner when choosing a shape to resist that kind of pressure. A sphere is uniformly resistant. It distributes stress perfectly evenly and has absolutely zero weak points. It's exactly why deep ocean submersibles, like the one James Cameron used, or the one planned by a recent real estate billionaire, rely entirely on spheres. A cylinder, on the other hand, is like that soda can we mentioned. Intuitively, if you want to crush a can, you don't push top to bottom, right? You squeeze its sides. The cylinder is inherently prone to structural weakness along its longest edge, making it incredibly vulnerable to those crushing deep sea forces. So, as forensic investigators looking at these blueprints, we've got to ask ourselves a pretty glaring rhetorical question. Why choose a fundamentally weaker cylinder design when spheres are the proven, logical choice for deep ocean survival? Now, what's really interesting about this idea is that the chilling compromise here essentially comes down to the harsh reality of corporate motivation versus structural integrity. You see, a sphere curves inward at every angle, which creates dead space and makes it incredibly hard to fit multiple people inside comfortably. But a cylinder, it functions much more like an aircraft fuselage, maximizing usable interior living space, and that allowed the Titan to fit 5 paying passengers at once. It reveals exactly how the drive to increase passenger capacity, and therefore profit, heavily influenced a design that completely sacrificed optimal structural safety. Section 3. The Carbon Fiber Gamble, where we look at pushing materials past their limits. This brings us to a massive, massive gamble. Instead of using proven materials like titanium or heavy steel, they chose a cylinder made of carbon fiber just over 12 centimeters thick. Why do that? Well, carbon fiber's main allure is its exceptionally high strength to weight ratio. It's strong, but incredibly light. By pushing these limits, they achieved a lighter vehicle that was vastly cheaper to move. You didn't need a massive crane on the mothership to deploy it. It was more agile underwater, requiring way less engine thrust. And because the sub wasn't weighed down by its own hull, they could pack in more passengers, cargo, and tech. But pushing this material's limits in an environment it wasn't traditionally designed for introduced immense, unseen vulnerabilities. And this brilliantly illustrates the timeline of material degradation, showing just how fragile this gamble was before the submersible even touched the ocean. Carbon fiber is highly vulnerable to impact loads during normal transport, which can easily introduce fatal kinks into a hull that needs to be absolutely impervious to pressure. But worse still, from July 2022 to February 2023, the sub was stored completely outdoors at a marine base in St. John's Harbor. We're talking about a harsh maritime climate here, with average winter lows of -5.5 degrees Celsius, snow, and freezing rain. Because of this, moisture was able to enter the carbon fiber composite, and we all know what happens when water freezes, right? It expands. This caused microscopic internal structural damage to the very material meant to hold back the ocean. All right, Section 4, Fatal Manufacturing Deficiencies, looking closely at the anatomy of a flawed core. Adopting a highly forensic approach, let's look at the actual physical evidence. Investigators managed to get a hold of a trimmed-off piece of the Titan's original carbon fiber core from its initial construction, long before the wreck ever occurred. When they took 18 microscopic samples from it, they found something deeply, deeply alarming. In a properly manufactured core, the stacked sheets of carbon composite should form clean, tight, uniform lines. Instead, the TSB found severe waviness, internal deformities, and massive gaps between the layers. Look, these aren't just cosmetic issues. These are critical manufacturing defects that grow and spread into catastrophic flaws every single time the structure is loaded with external pressure. The numbers here reveal a frankly shocking mathematical delta. By the TSB's own calculations, a defect-free carbon fiber cylinder should have been able to make millions of dives, using less than 0.0001% of its fatigue life over its first 24 trips. But because of these severe manufacturing flaws, the worst defects in the Titan's core had burned through more than 82% of its total fatigue life in those exact same 24 dives, meaning it was severely, terminally compromised before it ever even began its final 25th dive. Finally, Section 5, a complete testing failure, looking at the absolute ignoring of standard safety practices. Now, mechanical flaws can usually be caught by robust quality control, but that brings us to what is arguably the most damning failure of all. General MacArthur once said, "You're remembered for the rules you break." Well, this exact quote was actively cited by the leadership behind Titan as a justification for their whole approach. They purposefully prioritized rapid profit, experimental design, and cutting costs over the rigorous safety protocols that govern deep-sea exploration. They wanted to get down to the Titanic quickly, and they broke every rule in the book to do it. Let's move to that and see how this builds a picture of complete systematic failure. When we compare normal engineering practice against the Titan protocol, it's night and day. Normal engineering dictates exposing full-scale models to hundreds, even thousands of real-life pressure tests. The Titan team, they conducted only 4. After testing, normal protocol requires comprehensive core disassembly to inspect for microscopic damage. The Titan team performed 0 disassembly. And while standard practice relies on functional, redundant safety backstops, the report outlines how Titan operated with broken sensors and leaders who actively ignored warnings, even going so far as firing staff who dared to raise safety concerns. The TSB report paints a startlingly clear picture. This was a corporate culture blinded by the desire for innovation and profit, which casually dismissed internal experts and operated with a staggering lack of rigor. Because they never thoroughly tested or disassembled their experimental hybrid hull, nobody overseeing or operating the Titan had any accurate idea of what the vehicle's structural loading limits actually were. They essentially flew blind into one of the most hostile, unforgiving environments on planet Earth, ensuring the vessel had absolutely no business being where it was. As we wrap up this forensic review of the TSB report, we're really forced to look at the tragic cost of hubris. The physical laws governing 3,800 meters of ocean depth are absolute. They do not care about your desire to disrupt an industry. So I leave you with this final thought. When human lives are heavily reliant on structural integrity, is breaking established engineering rules a mark of visionary innovation, or is it just pure deadly negligence? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking the hard questions, and I'll see you next time.